What if the reason you have not succeeded yet has nothing to do with talent, luck, timing, education, or opportunity, but everything to do with the moment, quiet, invisible, and personal, when you decided, without fully realizing it, to stop demanding more from yourself? Most people never fail loudly. They fail inwardly. They fail in the unseen chambers of the mind long before the world ever delivers a verdict. They fail when the first resistance appears, and they mistake resistance for a sign to retreat instead of evidence that they are approaching something meaningful. They fail when desire weakens into preference, when purpose blurs into convenience, when effort becomes conditional upon comfort. And then they call it fate. They call it circumstances. They call it reality. But reality, as Napoleon Hill understood it, is first constructed in the mind and only later hardened into form. The command to never give up is not a slogan. It is not encouragement. It is not something spoken to soothe the wounded ego. It is a law of mental physics. The universe does not reward intention. It responds to definiteness. It does not move for wishful thinking. It rearranges itself around obsession, around persistence that refuses negotiation, around the individual who has made a decision so final that retreat no longer exists as an option. Giving up is not an action. It is a psychological surrender. And once the mind has surrendered, the body, the emotions, and eventually the circumstances will follow. Most people misunderstand persistence. They believe it is the ability to endure discomfort for a time. Hill knew better. Persistence is the refusal to entertain the idea of defeat at all. It is not heroic effort. It is mental discipline. It is the ability to hold a vision steady while the external world provides no evidence that the vision is valid. It is the capacity to continue moving forward while doubt whispers that stopping would be more reasonable. Reasonable thinking has never built anything extraordinary. Reasonable thinking is the language of the average, the comfortable, the resigned. Every worthwhile achievement is born from a period of prolonged invisibility. During this period, nothing appears to be happening. There is no applause, no validation, no proof, only effort, repetition, self-correction, and silence. This is where most people quit, not because they lack ability, but because they lack faith in forces they cannot see. Hill called these forces invisible, but he never called them imaginary. He understood that thought is energy, that belief is directive, and that sustained emotionalized desire impresses itself upon the subconscious mind, which then mobilizes behavior, perception, and opportunity in ways the conscious mind cannot trace. To give up is to interrupt this process. It is to pull the plug just as momentum is beginning to accumulate beneath the surface. Nature never reveals her progress while it is underway. Seeds break open underground. Muscles grow during rest, not exertion. Character forms during resistance, not ease. And success, real success, takes shape in the mind long before it appears in circumstances. The tragedy is not that people fail. The tragedy is that they stop just before failure would have taught them how to win. Fear is always present at the threshold of advancement. Hill identified fear not as an enemy to be eliminated, but as a signal to be mastered. Fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of ill health, fear of loss of love, fear of old age, fear of death. These fears operate subtly, infiltrating decision-making while pretending to be caution. Giving up often disguises itself as intelligence. It whispers that the risk is too high, the odds too low, the timing wrong. But fear never argues honestly. It never announces itself openly. It speaks in the voice of reason while eroding faith from within. Faith, as Hill defined it, is not blind belief. It is belief reinforced by repetition, emotion, and decision. Faith is built through auto-suggestion, through the deliberate feeding of the subconscious mind with thoughts aligned to purpose. When a person gives up, it is because they have rehearsed doubt more consistently than belief. The mind believes what it hears most often, especially when those thoughts are emotionally charged. Every internal statement of limitation becomes an instruction. Every mental retreat strengthens the habit of surrender. Never giving up requires something most people have never practiced: self-discipline of thought. Not motivation, discipline. Motivation is emotional and temporary. Discipline is mental and permanent. Discipline is the ability to choose a thought and reject another, regardless of mood or circumstance. It is the power to remain loyal to a purpose even when enthusiasm has vanished. Hill knew that enthusiasm fades quickly. That is why he placed such emphasis on definiteness of purpose. A vague aim provides no anchor during storms. A definite purpose becomes a fixed point the mind can return to when everything else feels uncertain. The individual who never gives up has reached a point of decision so absolute that alternatives no longer exist. This is not stubbornness, it is clarity. Once the mind has fully decided, persistence becomes natural. Giving up only remains possible when the decision was partial, when desire was conditional, when the individual secretly left an escape route. Most people do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because they never close the door behind them. Imagination plays a critical role in this process. Hill distinguished between synthetic imagination, which rearranges existing ideas, and creative imagination, which receives inspiration from deeper levels of intelligence. When you persist long enough, when desire is sustained and faith maintained, imagination begins to supply solutions that logic alone could never reach. But imagination only works for the committed. It does not reveal its gifts to the half-hearted. Giving up severs the connection. Persistence strengthens it. Decision, in Hill's philosophy, is the opposite of procrastination. It is the act of choosing firmly and acting immediately. Those who never give up do not make perfect decisions, they make definite ones. They adjust as they move. Indecision drains energy. It fragments desire. It creates internal conflict. And internal conflict always precedes surrender. The mind cannot advance while arguing with itself. Once decision is made, energy aligns. Effort becomes focused. Persistence becomes a matter of course. There is a moment in every serious pursuit when progress appears to stop entirely. Hill referred to this as the testing period. It is the point at which the mind is asked to prove the sincerity of its desire. Those who quit at this stage bell. Eve, they are being rejected by life. In truth, they are being examined. The test is simple. Will you continue without reward, without reassurance, without certainty? Most will not. A few will. Those few change their lives permanently. Never giving up is not dramatic. It is quiet, it is repetitive, it is often boring, it lacks glamour. But it is powerful beyond measure. The individual who masters persistence gains something more valuable than achievement, control over themselves. Once you have proven to your own mind that you do not retreat under pressure, confidence becomes unshakable. Not the loud confidence of ego, but the silent confidence of self-trust. This is why Hill insisted that success begins with the conquest of self. Money, position, recognition, these are byproducts. The real victory is internal. It is the transformation of the individual from someone who reacts to circumstances into someone who directs them. Giving up is the ultimate reaction. Persistence is the ultimate act of self-direction. Every time you continue when stopping would be easier, you are training the subconscious mind to associate effort with identity. You are becoming someone who finishes, someone who endures, someone who does not negotiate with weakness. Identity is destiny. The world responds to what you consistently prove yourself to be. Most people want results without transformation. They want the harvest without tending the soil. Hill's philosophy offers no such shortcuts. It demands payment in discipline, in faith, in persistence. The price feels high only to those who have not yet realized the cost of surrender. Giving up extracts interest for a lifetime. Never giving up is not about pushing endlessly in the same direction without thought. It is about maintaining purpose while refining method. Persistence does not mean blindness. It means loyalty to the objective, not attachment to a single approach. Those who quit confuse temporary defeat with permanent failure. Hill made a sharp distinction between the two. Defeat is a teacher. Failure is only final when accepted. As long as you continue, the story is unfinished. As long as effort persists, outcome remains negotiable. The moment you stop, you have decided, whether consciously or not, that the current version of yourself is sufficient. Growth ends there. The invisible forces Hill described respond not to effort alone, but to emotionalized persistence. When desire is intense, when faith is active, when imagination is engaged, when decision is firm, and when persistence refuses retreat, something shifts. Opportunities appear. Ideas surface, connections form. Not magically, but lawfully, the mind begins to notice what it once ignored. Action becomes aligned. Chance encounters stop being accidental. Never giving up is how you stay in the game long enough for these forces to organize around you. It is how you earn the right to outcomes that cannot be predicted, but can be expected by those who understand T. He laws, the world does not yield to those who try. It yields to those who continue. The moment you decide not to give up, something subtle but irreversible occurs within you. It is not visible. No one applauds it. The world does not pause to acknowledge it. Yet a line has been crossed inside the mind, and once crossed, it changes the way you interpret pain, delay, and resistance. What once felt like punishment begins to feel like proof. What once felt like rejection begins to feel like refinement. The individual who persists long enough begins to understand that opposition is not a sign of misalignment, but a requirement of growth. Napoleon Hill observed that every person who achieves something uncommon is forged in an environment that would have broken the average mind. This is not coincidence. The mind must be strengthened to hold the weight of greater responsibility, greater influence, greater reward. Weak structures collapse under pressure. Strong ones are built through it. Persistence is the pressure that builds internal structure. Without it, desire remains fragile, easily bent by inconvenience or delay. Most people abandon their purpose not because it is impossible, but because it demands a version of themselves they have not yet become. And instead of becoming more, they negotiate downward. They lower the aim. They dilute the desire. They tell themselves they never wanted it that badly. This is one of the most dangerous lies the mind can accept, because it disguises surrender as maturity. Hill warned that compromise with one's purpose is the first step toward lifelong dissatisfaction. When you never give up, you force the mind to adapt. It must find ways forward because retreat is no longer available. Creativity awakens under constraint. Discipline sharpens under necessity. Faith deepens under prolonged uncertainty. These qualities cannot be developed through ease. They are born through sustained effort without guarantee. This is why success always appears unfair to those who quit early. They never stayed long enough to witness the internal transformation that precedes external reward. Autosuggestion plays a silent but decisive role here. The subconscious mind does not distinguish between fear-based repetition and faith-based repetition. It accepts what is impressed upon it through emotion and frequency. When a person continually tells themselves that persistence is pointless, that the effort is wasted, that the outcome is unlikely, the subconscious accepts these statements as instructions. Behavior follows belief. Energy follows expectation. Giving up is often nothing more than the final visible act of a decision made long ago in thought. The disciplined individual uses autosuggestion deliberately, not as fantasy, but as conditioning. They repeatedly affirm their purpose, not because it feels good, but because it aligns the subconscious with intention. Over time, this alignment produces consistency. Consistency produces confidence. Confidence produces momentum, and momentum, once established, becomes difficult to stop. But momentum requires time. Giving up interrupts the process just as it begins to compound. Hill emphasized that persistence is sustained by clarity of purpose. Without clarity, effort becomes scattered, and scattered effort exhausts the mind. Exhaustion invites doubt. Doubt invites retreat. The person who never gives up knows exactly why they are enduring discomfort. Their purpose is not abstract. It is vivid. It is emotionally charged. It is personal. And because it is personal, it is non-negotiable. There will be periods when emotion collapses entirely, when enthusiasm disappears, when belief feels artificial. This is where most philosophies fail because they rely on inspiration to fuel action. Hill's philosophy does not. It relies on decision. Decision is stable when emotion is not. The individual who has decided does not ask whether they feel like continuing. Feeling is irrelevant. Purpose remains. Fear intensifies during these periods, not because danger has increased, but because the mind senses growth. Fear always rises when the individual approaches a higher level of responsibility. It is the mind's attempt to preserve the familiar. To give up at this point is to remain psychologically safe but permanently limited. To persist is to experience temporary discomfort in exchange for expanded identity. Hill understood that the greatest enemy of persistence is not fear but drift. Drifting is the habit of reacting instead of directing, of accepting circumstances instead of shaping them. The drifter gives up without drama. There is no single moment of surrender, just a gradual erosion of effort, a quiet withdrawal of intensity. The individual who never gives up is alert to this danger. They monitor their thinking. They notice when effort softens, when excuses begin to sound reasonable. They correct immediately. Imagination becomes sharper the longer one persists. At first, it produces crude images of success. Over time, it refines them. The mind begins to visualize not only the outcome, but the process, the obstacles, the adjustments required. This internal rehearsal strengthens resilience. The individual is no longer surprised by difficulty. They expect it, and what is expected is easier to endure. Decision once again becomes critical. The person who never gives up decides daily, sometimes hourly, to continue, not in grand declarations, but in small acts of discipline. They show up when it would be easier not to. They correct mistakes instead of hiding from them. They maintain standards even when no one is watching. These actions compound silently. Character is built invisibly, just like success. Hill spoke often of the mastermind principle, of surrounding oneself with aligned minds. But even in isolation, the individual who persists creates an internal mastermind. Thought becomes ordered. Purpose becomes dominant. Distractions lose power. Mind becomes a disciplined instrument instead of a chaotic battleground. Giving up becomes increasingly foreign to such a mind. Every test of persistence strengthens the next. Each time you endure without retreat, the subconscious records evidence that you are reliable. Self-trust grows, and self-trust is the foundation of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to obey it. Never giving up is courage practiced daily, quietly, relentlessly. There will be moments when the cost feels too high, when the sacrifice seems disproportionate to the reward. Hill warned that this perception is temporary. The mind cannot accurately evaluate long-term payoff during short-term pain. This is why persistence must be governed by principle, not emotion. The principle is simple. Continue until the objective is achieved or until it transforms into something greater. Most people never experience the second breakthrough. The first comes from excitement. The second comes from endurance. The first is fueled by novelty. The second is fueled by identity. The first feels good. The second feels necessary. Giving up almost always occurs between the two. When you persist beyond reason, beyond comfort, beyond external validation, you begin to operate under a different set of laws. Time becomes an ally instead of an enemy. Difficulty becomes feedback instead of threat. Effort becomes expression instead of burden. This is the psychological shift Hill understood deeply and described relentlessly. Never giving up is not about forcing outcomes. It is about becoming someone for whom the outcome is inevitable. When the internal conditions are met, definite purpose, burning desire, faith reinforced through autosuggestion, disciplined imagination, firm decision, and relentless persistence, the external world must eventually respond. It has no alternative. The question is never whether persistence works. The question is whether you will remain long enough to let it work on you. There comes a stage in persistence where effort no longer feels like effort, and yet the burden feels heavier than ever. This is the paradox that confuses the untrained mind. The body moves almost automatically, habits carrying action forward, but the psyche enters a deeper confrontation. This is the stage where giving up no longer presents itself as quitting, but as redefining one's identity. The thought does not say, stop trying. It says, become someone else. Choose a smaller life. Choose peace over purpose. Choose certainty over possibility. This is the most dangerous moment in the entire journey because the temptation is subtle, reasonable, and emotionally persuasive. Napoleon Hill understood that the mind seeks equilibrium. It resists prolonged tension. And a definite purpose sustained over time creates tension because it demands growth. Growth disrupts equilibrium. It forces the abandonment of old beliefs, old habits, old self-concepts. Giving up promises relief. Persistence promises transformation. Most people choose relief because they mistake comfort for happiness. Hill made a clear distinction. Comfort dulls the mind while purpose sharpens it. At this stage, faith is no longer emotional. It is structural. Early faith is fragile and enthusiastic. Later faith is quiet and disciplined. It does not need constant reassurance. It operates beneath awareness. It becomes a background assumption rather than a conscious declaration. This is why those who persist long enough appear calm in situations that paralyze others. Their faith has been tested repeatedly and survived. Doubt still visits, but it no longer dominates. The subconscious mind, conditioned through sustained autosuggestion and repeated action, begins to work independently. Opportunities are noticed instinctively. Decisions are made faster. Intuition strengthens. Hill referred to this as the guidance of infinite intelligence, not in a mystical sense, but as the result of a mind aligned with purpose and trained to recognize patterns others overlook. This guidance does not arrive suddenly. It develops gradually and only through continued effort. Fear evolves during this phase. It becomes less dramatic but more deceptive, no longer loud or urgent. It takes the form of fatigue, cynicism, impatience. It questions the necessity of intensity. It suggests moderation. It argues that obsession is unhealthy. These arguments sound mature. They are not. They are fear adapting to a stronger opponent. The individual who never gives up recognizes this shift and responds with renewed discipline rather than emotional resistance. Self-discipline at this level is not about forcing behavior. It is about protecting focus. Distractions multiply as persistence deepens. The closer one comes to mastery, the more invitations appear to divert energy. Hill warned that distraction is a silent killer of great purpose. Giving up rarely happens in one dramatic act. It happens through dilution, through spreading attention too thin, through losing the edge of desire. Burning desire must be maintained consciously. It does not sustain itself indefinitely without reinforcement. The disciplined individual revisits their purpose deliberately. They visualize outcomes not to escape reality, but to recharge commitment. Imagination becomes fuel rather than fantasy. It reminds the mind why endurance is necessary. Without this reinforcement, persistence decays into routine, and routine without purpose eventually collapses. Decision-making becomes sharper during this phase. The persistent individual learns to decide quickly and revise slowly. Indecision drains energy that persistence requires. Hill observed that those who never give up are not those who avoid mistakes, but those who refuse to be paralyzed by them. Error becomes information. Delay becomes feedback. Nothing is wasted. Everything is integrated. There is also a deep loneliness that emerges here. As persistence reshapes identity, inment with others weakens. Old relationships strain. Familiar conversations lose meaning. The individual begins to think differently, speak differently, value different things. This isolation tempts surrender because returning to the familiar promises connection. Hill acknowledged this cost openly. He believed it unavoidable. Growth separates before it unites. The invisible forces Hill described respond powerfully at this stage, not with immediate reward, but with internal coherence. Thoughts align, emotional swings stabilize, effort becomes efficient. This coherence is often mistaken for stagnation because progress is no longer chaotic or dramatic, but it is precisely here that foundations are finalized. The structure is being completed. Giving up at this point is like abandoning a building when the framework is finished, but the walls are not yet visible. Persistence also changes one's relationship with time. Urgency fades. Patience strengthens. The individual stops demanding immediate results and starts trusting process. This trust is not naive. It is earned through repeated evidence that effort compounds. Hill insisted that impatience is a form of disbelief. To never give up, one must outgrow impatience entirely. The ego undergoes a quiet death here. Early persistence is often fueled by proving something to others. Later persistence is fueled by integrity. The individual continues not for recognition, but because stopping would violate their self-concept. This shift is critical. External motivation is unstable. Internal alignment is not. Giving up at this stage would not feel like failure. It would feel like betrayal. And this is why those who persist this far rarely quit. They have integrated purpose into identity. To abandon it would require dismantling who they have become. Hill understood that true persistence is identity-based. When purpose and self merge, surrender becomes psychologically impossible. Still, the final tests intensify. Circumstances may worsen, delays may extend, doubt may resurface unexpectedly. These are not signs of regression, they are confirmations. The mind is being conditioned to operate without reassurance. The last weakness to be removed is dependence on outcome for motivation. Never giving up ultimately produces a mind that acts without needing proof. It moves because movement is aligned with identity. It endures because endurance is natural. This is the state Hill believed separated those who occasionally succeed from those who inevitably do. The individual who reaches this point has already won internally, even if the external world has not yet reflected it. And once the internal victory is secured, the external victory is only a matter of time. There is a point in prolonged persistence where effort stops feeling like resistance and begins to feel like command. This is not because circumstances have softened, nor because obstacles have disappeared, but because the individual has finally learned how to govern the one territory that determines all others, the inner world. Napoleon Hill understood that mastery over self is the final battleground, and once it is secured, the external world can delay, but it cannot deny. At this stage, the mind has been reshaped by repetition. Thought patterns that once undermined resolve have weakened through disuse. Emotional reactions that once hijacked momentum now rise briefly and pass without authority. This does not happen through suppression. Suppression creates pressure. It happens through familiarity. The individual has encountered fear, doubt, fatigue, and uncertainty so many times that their presence no longer signals danger. They have become known quantities. And what is known loses power. Never giving up, practiced long enough, trains the nervous system itself. Stress no longer triggers panic. Pressure no longer fractures focus. The body learns that intensity is survivable. The mind learns that discomfort is temporary. The soul learns that endurance produces clarity. Hill believed this conditioning was essential because the rewards of success require a psychological structure capable of holding them. Without this structure, opportunity becomes destructive instead of empowering. Self-discipline has evolved now. Early discipline was rigid and effortful, a constant forcing of behavior against impulse. That phase was necessary. But now discipline is subtle. It governs attention rather than action. The individual does not fight distraction aggressively. They simply do not feed it. Energy flows toward what matters because it has been trained to do so. Desire has been refined. Excess has been eliminated. Focus is sharpened to faith. Faith at this level is no longer something the individual tries to feel. It is something they operate from. It has moved beneath conscious awareness and become an assumption about reality. The mind no longer asks whether persistence will be rewarded. It assumes alignment and concerns itself only with execution. Hill wrote that faith becomes most powerful when it is no longer emotional but structural, when it organizes behavior automatically rather than needing constant reinforcement. The subconscious mind, having been impressed consistently with purpose and persistence, now works continuously. It searches for connections, solutions, efficiencies, and opportunities without conscious instruction. Ideas arise spontaneously. Insights appear during moments of rest. Patterns are recognized instantly. This is not intuition in the mystical sense. It is the natural outcome of a mind trained to observe, persist, and remain alert. Fear still exists, but it has lost its central role. It appears briefly, signals risk, and recedes. It no longer negotiates. It no longer persuades. Hill taught that fear loses power when it is confronted repeatedly and disobeyed consistently. Courage, then, is not a single act, but a habit formed through persistence, and habits, once formed, operate without effort. T. Imagination has also matured. In the beginning, imagination was emotional, fueled by longing and fantasy. Now it is disciplined and practical. The individual imagines systems, sequences, leverage points. They visualize not just the destination, but the path, the bottlenecks, the adjustments. Creativity becomes strategic. Hill believed this integration of imagination and discipline was the hallmark of those who move from aspiration into mastery. Decision-making has undergone a transformation. Indecision, once a source of internal conflict, has been replaced by movement. The individual no longer waits for certainty. They understand that certainty is created through action. Hill emphasized that waiting for perfect conditions is simply fear disguised as prudence. The persistent individual moves forward with incomplete information, trusting their ability to adapt rather than their ability to predict. There is also a deep emotional recalibration happening now. The individual is no longer emotionally dependent on outcomes for validation. This does not mean they care less. It means they care more cleanly. Attachment has been replaced by commitment. Commitment is stable. Attachment is volatile. Hill warned that desperation poisons faith while calm expectancy strengthens it. The mind now operates from expectancy. The social environment often becomes more complex during this phase. Some people begin to notice the individual's steadiness and consistency. Others feel unsettled by it. Criticism may intensify, misunderstanding may grow. Hill taught that this is inevitable when one outgrows familiar patterns. The individual who never gives up no longer seeks approval. They understand that approval follows alignment, not effort. Silence becomes a tool. The individual stops explaining themselves. They conserve energy. They let results speak when they arrive. Until then, they remain focused. This restraint is not arrogance, it is discipline. Hill understood that wasted emotional energy is one of the greatest threats to persistence. The internal dialogue has changed completely. The questions are no longer whether to continue, but how to refine, how to deepen competence, how to remove inefficiency. Giving up no longer presents itself as an option because it would require dismantling the internal structure that has been built. To stop now would not feel like rest. It would feel like self-destruction. This is where many experience what Hill described as the great turning point. It is not an external breakthrough. Nothing dramatic happens. No announcement is made. But internally, something settles. Anxiety fades. The future no longer feels uncertain. It feels inevitable. This feeling is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. It cannot be forced. It arrives only after persistence has proven itself reliable. Time is perceived differently now. The individual no longer feels rushed. They understand that what is being built is durable. Patience has matured into trust. Trust in process, trust in discipline, trust in the laws governing cause and effect. Hill insisted that this trust is the foundation of lasting success because it removes emotional volatility from action. Identity has been fully reshaped. The individual no longer sees themselves as someone trying to succeed. They see themselves as someone who follows through, someone who finishes, someone who does not abandon themselves when pressure rises. This identity radiates outward. Opportunities align not because the world has changed, but because perception has sharpened and behavior has become consistent. The invisible forces Hill spoke of are now fully engaged. Thought, emotion, belief, and action are synchronized. Energy flows toward purpose naturally. There is no wasted motion. Obstacles still appear, but they are integrated rather than resisted. Each challenge strengthens competence rather than undermines confidence. Never giving up has done its work internally. The structure is complete. The pressure has forged resilience. The mind is disciplined. The emotions are governed. The will is steady. What remains now is expression, and expression cannot be stopped by delay, only by surrender. The individual has crossed from struggle into inevitability, not because success has been guaranteed by circumstances, but because retreat has been removed from the psychological equation. As long as persistence remains intact, outcome must eventually conform. The world may not yet reflect what at. has already been decided internally, but that reflection is coming. It always does. There is a rare and demanding phase of persistence where the struggle is no longer against weakness, doubt, or inconsistency, but against complacency born from strength. This is the phase few ever reach, and fewer still survive without subtle self-sabotage. Napoleon Hill understood this danger intimately. He knew that when a person has proven to themselves that they can endure, that they can remain disciplined, that they can persist without reassurance, a new temptation emerges. The temptation to relax inwardly, to loosen mental standards, to assume inevitability without continuing to earn it. Never giving up at this level requires a deeper vigilance than ever before. The individual is no longer fighting to become strong, they are fighting to remain precise. Strength without precision decays into arrogance. Confidence without discipline becomes assumption. Hill warned that success is most often lost not at the beginning, but near the end, when the mind mistakes momentum for immunity. The inner world is calm now, but calm must be governed. The individual understands that peace is not permission to disengage. It is a resource to be protected. Emotional stability allows for clearer perception, but it can also dull urgency if not directed. The person who never gives up learns to generate intensity internally without relying on crisis. This is one of the most advanced psychological skills. Aha! Man-being can develop. Desire has changed its texture. It is no longer burning in the same volatile way it once did. It has become dense, concentrated, immovable. It no longer demands constant stimulation. It exists as a constant pressure beneath awareness. Hill believed this form of desire was the most powerful because it was immune to mood. It did not rise and fall. It endured. Faith, now fully integrated, is tested in new ways. Earlier tests challenged belief during adversity. Now belief is tested during stability. When nothing is obviously wrong, when progress appears smooth, the mind is tempted to coast. Hill taught that faith must be maintained not only when circumstances are hostile, but when they are neutral. Neutral conditions are dangerous because they invite unconscious drift. Drifting is the great enemy at this stage. Not dramatic surrender, but slow disengagement. Slight delays, minor compromises, subtle justifications. Hill described drifting as the absence of definite purpose in action, even when purpose still exists in theory. The individual who never gives up learns to detect drift early before it becomes habit. They correct immediately, without drama, without self-condemnation, but without mercy. Self-discipline now operates almost entirely in thought. Behavior follows naturally. The true work is mental alignment. The individual monitors internal dialogue closely. They notice when entitlement creeps in, when impatience resurfaces, when focus scatters. They understand that mastery is maintained, not achieved. Hill insisted that the price of success must be paid daily, and that payment never stops. Imagination at this level is used primarily for anticipation and prevention. The individual imagines potential obstacles before they arise. They rehearse responses. They design systems that reduce friction. Creativity becomes preventative rather than reactive. This is the mark of a mind that has matured through persistence. Problems are addressed before they become crises. Decision-making is now characterized by restraint as much as decisiveness. The individual knows when to act and when to wait. They are no longer compelled by urgency, but guided by alignment. Hill emphasized that wisdom emerges when decisiveness is balanced with patience. Impulsive action is replaced by deliberate movement, yet hesitation never returns. The relationship with fear has transformed again. Fear is no longer tied to failure. It is tied to responsibility. As capability increases, so does the weight of consequence. The individual senses that their actions now carry broader impact. This awareness can produce a new form of fear, the fear of misuse, of waste, of deviation. Hill believed this fear, when mastered, sharpened integrity. When avoided, it led to retreat disguised as humility. Never giving up now means remaining willing to carry responsibility without resentment, to continue expanding capacity even when life would allow contraction. Many a his stage choose a smaller life not because they cannot continue, but because they no longer feel pressured to. Hill warned that this choice, once made, is irreversible. The mind adapts quickly to reduced demand, and regaining intensity becomes exponentially harder. The individual who persists refuses this temptation. They continue refining standards. They raise expectations internally even when external demands remain unchanged. This self-generated pressure is the hallmark of greatness. Hill taught that those who achieve lasting success are driven from within long after external necessity has faded. There is also a profound reckoning with meaning here. Earlier persistence was fueled by goals, outcomes, achievement. Now the individual confronts a deeper question: who must I continue becoming to honor what I have built? Purpose expands. It becomes less about personal gain and more about expression of potential. Hill believed that the highest form of success was self-realization, the full use of one's faculties in service of a definite aim. This expansion of purpose renews intensity. It prevents stagnation. The individual begins to see their persistence not as a personal struggle, but as a responsibility to something larger than themselves. This shift is subtle but powerful. Effort gains dignity. Sacrifice gains context. Endurance gains meaning. The invisible forces Hill described respond strongly to this alignment. Opportunities now arrive with greater frequency, but also reader complexity. Simpler problems have been solved. Now challenges require judgment, patience, and restraint. The individual must resist the urge to rush. Persistence here is expressed through deliberation as much as action. There is also an increased awareness of legacy, not in the sense of recognition, but of consequence. The individual understands that what they build will influence others, directly or indirectly. This awareness sharpens ethics. It deepens self-discipline. Hill emphasized that power without character is destructive, and that persistence must be guided by principle to remain constructive. The internal battle now is subtle and continuous. There are no dramatic confrontations, no obvious crises, just the daily choice to remain exact, to remain aligned, to remain uncompromising with one's own standards. Giving up at this stage would not look like quitting, it would look like settling. And settling, Hill believed, was the most dangerous form of failure because it masquerades as contentment. Never giving up now means refusing to allow comfort to replace purpose. It means using stability as a foundation for further growth rather than as an excuse for stagnation. The individual understands that growth does not end when success begins. In truth, it demands more. The mind is quiet now, but alert. Focus is deep, but flexible. Emotion is steady, but alive. The individual operates with calm intensity, a state Hill believed was the optimal condition for sustained AC. Heavement. There is no longer a need to prove anything. There is only a need to remain true. At this level, persistence has become character. Character has become identity. Identity has become destiny in motion. The individual no longer wonders whether they will continue. Continuation is assumed. The only remaining variable is how fully they will express what they have become. And as this phase deepens, as precision sharpens, as purpose expands, the final demand approaches. Not the demand to endure, but the demand to choose with absolute clarity how one will stand in the world with what persistence has earned. The final act is approaching. The moment where internal conquest must translate into decisive external expression. The moment where hesitation, if it appears, must be destroyed completely. The mind senses it, the body feels it, the structure is ready. What remains is the final decision to step fully into responsibility, without retreat, without excuse, without reservation. And that decision, once made, will require everything that never giving up has built. There is a final crossing that occurs after persistence has reshaped the mind, disciplined the emotions, hardened decision, and stripped away every illusion except one, the illusion that life will ever ask permission before demanding more from you. Napoleon Hill understood that the ultimate test of never giving up is not whether you can endure difficulty, but whether you can stand fully exposed to responsibility, without shrinking, without hiding, without retreating into comfort or excuse. At this stage, the individual is no longer becoming. They are being summoned. Everything that persistence has built internally now demands expression. The inner conquest is complete, but it is meaningless unless it is lived outwardly. This is where many hesitate for the last time, not because they are weak, but because they finally understand the weight of what they carry. Capacity invites consequence. Power invites accountability. Clarity invites decision. Never giving up now means refusing to dilute yourself when the world finally requires you to be exact. It means resisting the instinct to soften your edges to remain acceptable. Hill taught that the moment of greatest opportunity is also the moment of greatest temptation to retreat, because stepping fully into purpose eliminates every remaining excuse. Once you act from this level, you can no longer blame ignorance, fear, or uncertainty. You know who you are. You know what you are capable of, and that knowledge is irreversible. The mind is completely still here, not empty, but ordered. Thoughts no longer compete. Desire no longer argues. Faith no longer needs reinforcement. What remains is will, clear and unshaken. The will to act even when action exposes you. The will to continue even when continuation removes every illusion of safety. Hill believed this was the highest form of courage, the courage to accept full responsibility for one's life without reservation. Fear makes one final appearance here, not as panic, not as doubt, but as gravity. It asks whether you are willing to live at the level you have prepared yourself for. It asks whether you are willing to be seen, judged, misunderstood, resisted. It asks whether you are willing to carry the consequences of your own power. Many who have endured years of hardship falter here, because hardship is familiar, but responsibility is naked. Never giving up at this level means refusing to step back into invisibility. It means refusing to pretend you are smaller than you are. Hill warned that the most painful regret is not failure, but unused potential. And unused potential is not lost in moments of weakness, but in moments of hesitation when strength is already present. The invisible forces that have been aligning quietly now stand ready. Thought, belief, emotion, discipline, imagination, and decision are synchronized. There is no internal resistance left to sabotage action. What remains is execution, clean, direct, uncompromising. The individual understands now that destiny is not discovered. It is assumed. This is where definiteness of purpose reaches its final form. The purpose is no longer something you pursue. It is something you embody. Every action either honors it or betrays it. There is no middle ground. Hill insisted that neutrality is impossible at this level. You are either fully aligned or you are drifting backward. Never giving up now requires a ruthless honesty with oneself. No more rehearsing intentions. No more waiting for ideal conditions. No more delaying action under the guise of preparation. Preparation is complete. The cost has been paid. The mind has been forged. To hesitate now would not preserve safety. It would destroy integrity. The world does not need another person who understands success intellectually. It is filled with those who know what should be done and never do it. The world is shaped by those who act while carrying fear, who decide while lacking certainty, who persist when recognition is absent, and who accept responsibility when excuses would be easier. This is where Napoleon Hill's philosophy becomes unavoidable. You now know that circumstances do not control you. Thought does. You know that desire must be burning, not casual. You know that faith must be conditioned, not hoped for. You know that autosuggestion programs destiny daily. You know that persistence outlasts resistance. You know that imagination precedes reality. You know that decision ends wandering. You know that fear is mastered through obedience denied. You know that self-discipline is freedom. And you know that giving up has always been a choice, never a necessity. So now the final demand is made of you. Decide who you are willing to be when no one is watching and everything is at stake. Decide whether you will live as someone who almost became something or as someone who followed through when retreat would have been easier. Decide whether your life will be governed by comfort or commanded by purpose. Stop negotiating with weakness. Stop postponing commitment. Stop waiting for permission, approval, or reassurance. They are not coming. They never were. Stand up internally, completely, without condition. Choose your purpose again, deliberately, with full awareness of the cost. Then act in alignment with it today, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Act when fear is present. Act when confidence is quiet. Act when results are delayed. Act because action is who you are. Never give up is no longer advice. It is an order you give yourself. Carry it out, relentlessly, without excuse, without retreat, and without ever betraying the person you now know you are capable of being.